Hey guys, how you all doing? So today I'm going to do an albums rankings of the studio albums from my least favourite to favourite of ex-Beatle George Harrison. Now George has become probably my favourite solo Beatle over the last 5 years. I've really got to know his solo output a lot better than I had previous to that, purely because I bought the vinyl box set of all his studio albums when that first came out. I think it was 2018 or something like that. So I bought that, so I had his whole back catalogue to look at, whereas I'd already had that of George and John and most of Ringo's. So yeah, I've really grown to appreciate George's solo career a lot more than I had previously, only having 3 or 4 albums plus a couple of compilations and a few of his singles. So anyway, here goes. There's going to be some surprises, folks, so sit down and hold your breath, or don't hold your breath, because the ones you really love may not be in my top 5, but we'll see anyway. Anyway guys, at number 12 on my list I have Electronic Sound. This was his second album. It was released in 1969. It's described as being avant-garde / electronic. It's often referred to as an early example of an electronic album by a mainstream rock artist. Influenced a lot of guys in the period after this, in the early 70s. But yeah, there was a big influence on the electronic genre and the ambient genre. The album consists of just 2 tracks, one on each side. It's loaded with synthesizers and sound effects. This really isn't my thing at all. So I don't like this at all. I just don't like it. Maybe people who are into this sort of music could let me know in the comments below if this is any good for the genre of music that it portrays. But as for me, I really don't like this. I couldn't care less if I never hear it again. At number 11 on my list, I have his debut album. This one was released in 1968. It's described as raga rock. I think that's how I pronounced it. Indian classical and experimental world music. Another instrumental album, as was his second one. It was the soundtrack to a movie called Wonderwall, directed by his friend Joe Masot, who I believe was the director of the Help movie, or had some input into the Beatles' Help movie in some way, shape or form. Again, if you guys know any more about Joe Masot and what his link was with the Help movie, feel free to put it in the comments below. I'd love to learn, His guest appearances on here from Ringo Starr and his bestie Eric Clapton. Again, instrumental stuff for a whole album is really not my thing. I don't like it at all. Again, if there's people out there that love this album, let me know in the comments section below why you love this album and why I should change my mind. At number 10 on my list, this one a few years ago would have rated a lot higher. Dark Horse. It's his 5th studio album, and as the title suggests, Dark Horse, it is a dark album. The themes of this album, marital strife, self-doubt, lost friendships, and they all dog this album to the point of being depressive in places, but at the same time it's still uniquely George Harrison with its overall, I guess his music has always been positive for me. It might be light and breezy or really up-tempo and poppy, but his music always comes across as being positive, even though some of his lyrics, and that's what saves this one on this occasion from being any further down than what it is in the list. Guest players on this include Billy Preston, Ringo Starr, Klaus Voormann, Gary Wright, Ronnie Wood, and Foreigner's Mick Jones, to name a few. Listen, it is a solid album. There's nothing overly bad about it. It's dark lyrically, but it's uplifting musically. And on this occasion, I really did like this album. It still comes in at 7 out of 10, which is a reasonable effort. So I do like this album. At number 9 on my list, I have 33 and a Third from 1976. This was his 7th solo album. It opens up with some funky disco beats, and it's an upbeat album that has a summery vibe to it. Some gorgeous love songs on here mixed with some tongue-in-cheek humour. Beautiful Girl is probably my pick track from this album, and it's one of those gorgeous love songs that I think even Paul McCartney would have loved to have written and would probably be envious of the actual song itself. Not that I've read anywhere that he's envious about it, but I just feel it's just one of those great songs that he would really look up to himself. Anyway, for me, this is a real uplifting album. Yeah, it comes in at just under 8 out of 10. I do love this album, and I love every album from here on in from George Harrison. Next up at number 8 on my list, I have 1975's Extra Texture. Opens up with the effervescent, uplifting You, which was the minor hit, but the lead-off single from the album. Has a summery, danceable vibe, similar to What Is Life from 1970, 71-ish. The album contains 2 of his most beautiful love songs, in my opinion. Can't Stop Thinking About You and Tired of Midnight Blue. So if you don't have this album and you really want to check out 2 of the most beautiful love songs ever written on Spotify or Deezer or whatever your streaming service of choice is, check out Can't Stop Thinking About You and Tired of Midnight Blue. I must admit that when I first got this album, I had it on cassette originally. I couldn't stand it. For years and years, I just did not like this album, and then it finally clicked, and I do love it now. I know it doesn't fare well with a lot of his critics and fans, but it really is a diamond in the rough for me, and it just continues to get better and better over the last 5, 6, 7 years. At number 7 for me, this one's going to surprise a lot of people. All Things Must Pass, his 3rd album, was released in 1970. It's widely regarded as the best solo Beatle project by any of the 4 Beatles. It's a triple LP set. So who's who of a supporting cast on here? Gary Brooker, Ginger Baker, Eric Clapton, John Lennon, Ringo Starr, Dave Mason, Peter Frampton, to name a few. The list goes on and on and on. Now, the reason this album ranks so low for me, number 7, even though I do love it, I do love this album, it just ranks so low because the first album is simply majestic. Okay, every track on it is an absolute cracker in my opinion. LP 2, half of it is as good as the first LP, and the other half is still very good. The thing that lets it down is LP 3. It's the whole Apple Jam thing. I just don't like it. I don't get it. I think if it was released now as an album, All Things Must Pass, then the 3rd LP would certainly be sort of the deluxe version of it. It wouldn't have been included on the original album. It would have been deluxe or bonus tracks. And that's the reason it lets this album down. Had it have not been for that 3rd LP, this certainly would have been top 2 or 3 for me, I think. But it's just that 3rd LP. At number 6 on my list, I have the follow-up to All Things Must Pass, called Living in the Material World. This one's from 1973. It's his 4th solo album. The songs on here have a bit of a yin and a yang thing going on. That's for want of a better phrase, I guess, because there's 2 distinct opposing lyrical themes throughout this album. You've got the first part. I'm not saying side 1 is all one part, side 2 is another part. The tracks are intermingled one after the other, etc. But half this album is full of his serenity songs, songs that being at peace with his faith and the joys and happiness of his faith. And the second half of the songs are about the awkwardness of dealing with being an ex-Beatle and the pressures that puts on people, or on George at the time anyway. So you got the sort of depressive side of being an ex-Beatle and having to live up to the expectations of that, and then you've got the faith side of him. The music itself, though, is absolutely wistful and breezy. George's gentle guitar riffs on here are just a leading role, just like they are on most of his albums. You got the slide guitar, you got beautiful little gentle riffs, like Mark Knopfler's, just gentle little riffs. They're just absolutely gorgeous, and George just does it brilliant on here. Again, it's an all-star cast. You've got Klaus Vorderman, who always seems to be working with him, and Ringo. You've got Ringo Starr. You've got piano maestro. Is that what you'd call him? I don't know. Leon Russell, absolutely brilliant. Gary Wright, and of course Badfinger's Peter Ham does backing vocals on here. So yeah, an excellent album. This one comes in just over 8 out of 10 for me. At number 5 on my list of George Harrison solo albums, I have 1981 Somewhere in England. This was his 9th studio album. It's the first one I actually purchased as a youngster back in the day. I guess I would have bought it partly because it contains all those years ago, and partly because he is an ex-Beatle and it was the first album of his released since I really got into the Beatles in 1979. So yeah, it has that nostalgic warmth for me. The album was originally rejected by the label as being too laid back, and so he had to dump 3 or 4 songs, record another couple of others, and he sings about his hate for the men in suits in Blood from a Clone, the opening track. Then there's also the assassination of John Lennon and how he was feeling about that thrown in the works. So it probably was an album where he was rejected and John dying that I don't think George was really fond about after it and as he moved forward. But yeah, I think it's a great album. You know, there's rock, there's pop, there's pseudo disco, there's environmental songs, there's jazzy bluesy track which is a cover, Baltimore Oriole, and of course some world music on here. It's almost an umbrella showcasing everything that George can do, but in one album, and I absolutely love this. I think it's fantastic. Number 4 on my list, I have 2002's Brainwashed. This was released posthumously. He'd almost got it completed before his death. Was his 12th and final album. It was finished in that 12 months after his death by Jeff Lynne and son Darnie. Couple of tracks on here: Any Road, P2 Vatican Blues, sound almost like they could have been on a Travelling Wilburys album. There's an instrumental, Marwar Blues, that has a Mark Knopfler vibe, feel to the guitar work. Even though you know it's not Mark Knopfler, it has a certain vibe that could be a Mark Knopfler type thing. An excellent album, and a fitting end of an album to a career, especially with the final track, which is the title track. So the final track's about 7 minutes long. You've got 3 verses, I think, that are full of sarcasm and wit, which is typical of George Harrison. Then there's the reading of a bit from a Bible, not like the King James Bible, one of his Krishna or Indian Bible text things. And then you've got some Krishna chants at the end, and that one song alone just sums up George Harrison, in my opinion. Brilliant song. It's probably my favourite song of his entire solo career, and a very, very good album that just seems to be getting better with age, in my opinion. Number 3, this one's going to surprise a lot of people, and it surprised me actually, because up until a couple of years ago this would have been down totally at the bottom, but it's really gone up now in the last couple of years, and that's his 10th studio album, Gon Troppo. This one was released in 1982. Yeah, as I said, a couple of years ago I would have called it a piece of crap, a throwaway album, the worst album by any solo Beatle ever. But now it's just got this charm to it. I think it's very underrated and appreciated. You know, it's got a lot of catchy tunes. In fact, it's quite a commercial sounding album, and yet it wasn't a commercial success. Whether that's because George refused to make videos for the singles off it, refused to promote it, refused to tour it, whatever, refused to do interviews for it. I don't know, but it's actually a very commercial album. It's probably as commercial as Cloud 9 in a lot of ways. It's very radio friendly, and it just didn't receive any commercial success anywhere. I don't think it charted anywhere in the world, and I don't think any of the singles did neither. But this is great stuff. It's very underrated and deserves more love in my opinion. Well worth checking out if you haven't already checked this album out. It's one of those sleepers, I think, that, you know, people seem to forget about. But yeah, great album. This one comes in at 9 out of 10 for me. Next up at number 2, which was usually around my top 2 George Harrison albums any time since I've heard it. And I got this about around 1990. I think I eventually got this album on vinyl, but it's obviously in that box set that I've got it in now. And it's his self-titled 1979 album, George Harrison, obviously. There's hints of jazz and blues on here. There's pop, there's disco, and it's still typical George Harrison. It's probably the most uplifting album of his career, lyrically. It's just really positive. The music, you know, it's like a cool breeze on a summer's day, you know, with the breeze rustling through the leaves on the trees and making the, you know, the cornfields or the hay just sway from side to side. It's just got that total vibe about it. The single off this album, Blow Away, that sums up the album. The whole vibe and feel of that one song being positive and uplifting just sums up the whole album for me. It's just happy, joyous George Harrison. And I think he writes best when he's happy, whether it's in love or, you know, really delving into his religion or whatever. As long as George Harrison is happy, he just writes majestic material, and this is the happy album. This is George's happy album for me. And yeah, I don't think, as far as songwriting goes, I don't think he bettered this album. I think it's just an absolute masterpiece. I do, however, think and know that All Things Must Pass is his best album. That's the pinnacle overall for what he achieved. But this is just my, you know, it's just a gorgeous, joyous George Harrison album. On every level, it just warms your heart and lifts your spirits when you're down. It's just incredible. Great album, number 2 for me. Which any George Harrison fan will know what is number 1. I didn't expect this one to be number 1. I expected it before I re-listened to it to come in at probably 4, 3 at best, 4, 5, somewhere around there. Top 5 certainly, but lower echelons of the top 5. And that's 1987's Cloud 9, his 11th solo album. A welcome return to chart success. Has a fresh pop sound on this, very catchy, very commercial. The production on it is crystal clear. It's Jeff Lynne production, and that just about says it all. Everything Jeff Lynne turns his hand to is just pure crystallized magic, in my opinion. The songs are well crafted, probably the most well crafted pop songs of his career. I know the previous album at number 2 has the best crafted pop songs. This is the best pop crafted album of his career. It's just not one weak link on this album. The weakest track, I guess, would be the multi-million selling single Got My Mind Set On You, which was actually a cover of a single by R&B singer James Ray back in 1962. As much as I love James Ray's original, and I'm a huge fan of R&B soul music from the 60s, as many people know from my channel. I keep championing the black soul singers in a lot of my videos. I do mention them. This one's actually a lot better, and yet it's the weak link on the album. You know, it is actually a very uplifting and positive album for the most part. And even on the cover there, George is smiling. He looks happy. He looks content, you know. It's just absolutely great album. It's a feel-good album, and you just can't help but tap your feet to these songs. It's just, yeah, it's just a fantastic album. The cover art actually sums up the album, in my opinion. It's just absolutely fantastic. Anyway, guys, if you like my George Harrison's rankings video. Feel free to leave your comments below. Leave your list in the comments section below. What do you think of George Harrison as a solo artist? Are you a fan of his? What albums of his do you have, etc.? Till next time, guys, stay safe, take care. All for now. Catch you around, and bye.